In recent years, what the EU describes as irregular immigration has become one of the most salient and difficult to solve issues for Europe. In an attempt to reduce migration flows, the EU has struck several deals with border authorities in countries like Tunisia, Egypt and Mauritania, while individual countries tightened asylum laws and flirted with various offshoring proposals involving third countries like Albania and Rwanda. While many politicians and commentators were initially sceptical, the latest data suggests that the EU's hardline approach seems to be working. According to the EU's border agency Frontex, in the first 8 months of this year, irregular border crossings into the EU fell by 21% compared to the same period last year, and by 53% compared to 2023. So in this video, we'll explain the trend of irregular immigration into Europe, the EU's network of international migration deals, and why it seems to be working. Could you rank every single politician in the world? Hear our thoughts and argue with us on our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. Let's start by explaining Europe's struggle with irregular migration. This began after the 2015-16 refugee crisis, when record levels of migrants and asylum seekers moved to the EU from conflict-afflicted regions like Syria, Afghanistan and parts of Africa. This huge spike in arrivals exposed weaknesses in the EU's migration system and showed how any action by one member state also had consequences for others. It also highlighted how under-equipped member states were to deal with large-scale immigration, which had become a major wedge issue and driven support for right-wing populist parties across Europe at recent elections. Numbers fell back down in the late 2010s, but in the 4 years after the pandemic, irregular migration into Europe started rising once again. This quickly became a big political issue in the EU, and in June 2024, the EU's new Pact on Migration and Asylum entered into force, after nearly 4 years of negotiations. For context, the pact aimed to create a new, more comprehensive framework for managing migration as a bloc, with a focus on international deals to reduce irregular crossings. The logic here was that, by partnering with countries along busy migration routes and paying them to strengthen their own border security, the EU could slow migration flows before they reached Europe's external borders, thereby reducing the overall number of people arriving irregularly. In recent years, the top 3 routes for irregular crossings into the EU have been the Central Mediterranean route from Tunisia and Libya to Italy and Malta, the Eastern Mediterranean route from Turkey to Greece and Cyprus, and the Western Balkans route from the Western Balkans into Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary and Croatia. Although the Western African route from Mauritania and Morocco to Spain's Canary Islands has become increasingly popular in recent years. This is why in the past 2 years the EU has signed several migration-related deals with countries in North Africa, including a multi-billion euro aid deal with Egypt, with at least €200 million for migration, a €210 million deal with Mauritania, of which €60 million was for migration, and a €165 million deal with Tunisia. Essentially, the EU's deals with other countries have created a multinational migration control network that works like an invisible border wall, located beyond the EU's geographical land borders. In exchange for EU funds, these country security forces receive training and equipment from the EU, such as radar, boats and land border posts, to intercept and turn back migrants inside non-EU countries, well before they even reach Europe to claim asylum. This strategy also depends on the cooperation of as many partner countries as possible, because if only one route is blocked, migrants will find another. The EU also has border control deals with Balkan countries like Serbia, Albania and Moldova, which allow Frontex officials to carry out operations on their territory. On top of all of these partnerships, the EU is also exploring new arrangements to hold or remove migrants. In July, EU ministers met with UN representatives to discuss running 2 kinds of migration centres in non-EU countries: return hubs, where asylum seekers could be taken when their claims fail, and places of safety, where people rescued in the Mediterranean could be taken to be screened and then potentially relocated. The European Parliament is also now considering 4 proposed amendments to the EU's safe third country concept, which would essentially broaden its application and allow the EU to send failed asylum seekers to third countries without having to prove a link between the asylum seeker and the country. Now, we should clarify that these changes are still under negotiation and need to be approved by both the EU Council, i.e. the 27 heads of state, and the European Parliament. While most member states reportedly agreed to the proposals, due to rising domestic pressures to curb irregular migration and a growing consensus that new solutions are needed, opposition is expected from the Parliament, particularly from the 3 left-wing blocs, the Socialists and Democrats, the Greens/EFA, and the Left, who traditionally oppose the EU offloading its asylum responsibilities. Human rights groups have also criticised the proposals, with a group of 52 organisations arguing in a joint letter that the EU was seeking to sidestep legal obligations and shift responsibility onto other countries. Anyway, so that's what the EU has done so far about irregular migration. But are these policies actually working? Well, according to the latest Frontex data from September, they do appear to have been fairly effective. As we mentioned earlier, in the first 8 months of this year, irregular border crossings fell by 21% compared to the same period last year, and by 53% compared to 2023, with the steepest declines in the Western African, Western Balkans and Eastern borders routes. While the Western Mediterranean route did see an increase and flows via the Central Mediterranean route remained flat, in the aggregate, irregular immigration into Europe has fallen quite dramatically in 2025. Nonetheless, while flows have clearly declined, this doesn't necessarily mean that the EU's new restrictive immigration policies have been an unqualified success. For starters, migration flows were already falling before the 2024 Migration Pact came into force, with a 25% drop in arrivals between 2023 and 2024, which suggests other factors might have been pushing down migration numbers anyway. A recent report from the German Council on Foreign Relations, for instance, argued that the slowdown in irregular arrivals via the Central Mediterranean route might not reflect the success of the EU's Tunisia deal, but rather how 2023 itself was an outlier, as migrants rushed across to Europe before tougher controls came in. Furthermore, this has all required the EU to turn a blind eye to reports of human rights violations on the part of their partner countries. There have been well-documented cases of migrant abuse by Libyan coast guards, which are effectively militias, since at least 2021, and a Human Rights Watch report from August also found that Mauritanian security forces have systematically abused migrants in horrifying ways. Ultimately, while there has been an undeniable humanitarian cost to the EU's new immigration policies, their apparent success in reducing flows towards Europe has made them remarkably popular in Brussels, and we should expect them to persist and even expand in the future. Ultimately, we live in a world where growing geopolitical and economical issues like these are hitting the headlines every day. While it's easy to sometimes feel overwhelmed, there are ways to stay sharp, and we know that the easiest way to do so is by using Brilliant. That's because Brilliant teaches you by doing, using active learning techniques to train you in the principles behind otherwise complex subjects, and ensuring that you actually understand what's going on. With our ever-growing collection of lessons in topics ranging from maths to science to AI, there's plenty to get you started. Not only does each lesson offer a comprehensive mix of engaging problems and competitive features, but Brilliant also helps you stay consistent, keeping you motivated and excited to learn every single day. Take their newly updated science courses, for example. Here you can learn how to build simple computers out of logic gates, or open your eyes to the world around you by solving puzzles with science. Each lesson will help you develop your scientific intuition through visual interactive problem solving that gets you hands-on with key concepts. Try Brilliant for free and start your learning journey today by visiting brilliant.org/TLDR, scanning the QR code on screen, or clicking the link in the description. By doing so, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription, and they'll know that you came from us, which really helps us out.